Legal problems, whether you're a baseball player or a college student, there's still problems. You're watching Unbillable. On today's episode, I have to start talking about something that I don't really like talking about, something I actually don't like at all. How do I say this? I don't like baseball. I mean, there, I said it. I know it's kind of un-American. I'm okay with it. I hope you're okay with it too. I don't like baseball. I think it's kind of boring. But look, I digress. We don't really need to talk about that. I'm sure there's some people that think football is boring, and they're wrong. Football's amazing. But again, that's not really what we're here to discuss. See, there's a baseball player, and he signed a lease in New York. I believe his name is Noah. I'll leave his last name out of it, Syndergaard. But my point's just to say, he signed a lease in New York, a lease to rent an apartment in New York City. Now, let's talk about a couple things. Number one, this is not any ordinary lease. And when I say not any ordinary lease, it actually is an ordinary lease. And when I say that, it sounds like I'm talking out of both sides of my mouth. I know that. But the point is, it's just different when you're a baseball player signing a lease in the city of New York. Why? Because the dollar value of your rent. Now, this is a baseball player paying $27,000 a month in rent for an apartment in New York City, an apartment that only has 5 other units, or maybe 5 units total in the building. So we're talking about a pretty exclusive space at a pretty high cost. I mean, I don't know about you, but $27,000 a month is a pretty high amount of rent. And see, that's not the reason I hate baseball. I hate baseball because it's slow. But the reason I'm bringing up Mr. Syndergaard and his problems are the pandemic canceled the baseball season. And guess what else? He ended up needing surgery, Tommy John surgery. He's a pitcher and he needed surgery on his elbow. So he's not gonna be pitching. And I don't know if you're aware, but there's this little pandemic going around. So the baseball season isn't taking place. I guess it might be delayed, maybe canceled. They haven't really said for sure, or at least they haven't made a determination all the way that I'm aware of. But we know this much, based on the surgery and the delays associated with the season, and of course, New York being a hotbed for this pandemic, Noah Syndergaard doesn't need that apartment. And so he contacted his landlord and tried to get out of his lease. And see, what's interesting for me about this specific situation is I've had 3 telephone consultations. 3 consultations by telephone with college students. All 3 college students. Now, one was local, the other 2 were not, but that doesn't really matter. All 3 of themselves are in the same exact position, actually a pretty similar position to this baseball player in New York. All 3 of these college students that contacted me, they reached out because they had signed leases for apartments or, housing near their college campus. And now, just recently, they've been informed that their college will not be held on campus, right? The entire shift of the college will be to the online system. And if they're taking their classes online, well then they don't really need the apartment. And when I say they don't really need the apartment, it's not that they don't really need it, they don't need it at all. One of these people lives in Arizona, and they're a student at a Cal State University, of course, here in California. They don't need to come stay in California to take classes online. They can do that from the comfort and, frankly, lower expense probably of at home with their mom and dad in Arizona. So you can see why that person wants to exit their lease, just like you can see why that Major League Baseball player wants to exit his lease. The shifting of the season, the delay of the season changed things for that pitcher, just like the shifting of classes from the campus to online has changed things for the student. And quite frankly, as a professor, let me just take a moment to say, the shifting of classes online has changed things for me significantly as well. Like, I teach a lecture-based class that does a lot of communication with the students where we interact and have conversations about the topics, maybe even things like this, Major League Baseball players who find themselves in sort of lease quagmires. But oftentimes students don't want to talk back right away. There's kind of that awkward silence that you let sit. And when you let that silence sit, that's when the students, just to break it, will engage with you. And when one engages, then another engages, and another engages. It becomes like it slowly builds up like a tidal wave till you have like this great big conversation. And when you find yourself on Zoom, it doesn't really work like that. It's interesting, that little delay or that time that you let sit, it can just sit there forever. And no one will break that awkward silence. But see, in the event that you have a dispute with a landlord, that awkward silence won't sit like that, because property disputes and landlord-tenant disputes in specific scenarios, of course, I'm talking about California, they're given priority right? We want a landlord to be able to put his property to use, meaning rent it out to another rent-paying tenant as soon as possible. So we give landlord-tenant disputes, especially those about, I shouldn't say especially, those about possession of the property, we give those priority, right? And so it's interesting because these college students and this baseball pitcher are in the same predicament, and they couldn't get more different advice or information or guidance. I mean, I should say, while the college students did contact me, Noah Syndergaard, the Mets pitcher, never did. And again, I don't really like baseball, so I'm okay with that. But had he contacted me, I might not have told him to take his case to Twitter, but I would have been okay with him saying, I'll see you in court to the landlord, because he has the resources necessary to fight the landlord. And frankly, those same resources are probably part of the reason, at least, the landlord is pursuing him for the rent that's due under the lease. You see, you have a lease for like, I don't know, 9 months, a year. So you've agreed to pay a certain amount. Again, here, $27,000 every single month for that entire term. Your landlord's probably relied on that promise, right? Either taken some steps financially, potentially, relying on the rent that's coming in, or more importantly, maybe someone else came to look at the unit and the landlord said, oh, sorry, you can't rent it. It's already taken, and turned away another tenant. So the idea that you're just gonna say, well, hey, things changed, I don't really wanna pay the rent, it's not gonna be that easy for the landlord. The landlord probably has bills, almost certainly has bills to pay also. And they're not gonna just be able to say, well, hey, the baseball season got pushed back, so I'm gonna have to push back paying you too. And that's what gets you into this kind of crescendo moment, whereas the baseball player, you can hire a lawyer because you have those resources and you have an asset pool to protect from the landlord, and you can push back. And when your attorney shows up and their attorney shows up, each attorney being paid, in other words, eating up some of those resources, it creates an incentive for both parties to kind of find a reason to negotiate, find a reason to resolve their claim without it being a one side wins, the other side loses. But when you reverse things and you look at the college student, they don't have those resources. They can't afford to hire the attorney necessary to push back against the landlord. They don't have those resources, and they're unable to kind of have the same result that the baseball player would have. And since students don't have assets to hire a lawyer, is it just easy to say, well, if they don't have those assets, then they don't need protection from the landlord anyway? Well, the answer to that is also a no. I mean, those students have ambition. That's why they're in college, if you will, in the first place. And they don't want to let that landlord have a judgment that hangs over them. I mean, once they finally have money, can you imagine the landlord from way back when scooping in to collect money for a rental unit that they never actually even occupied? See, it's one of those scenarios where you might not have the assets to hire the lawyer you need to protect yourself, but you still need to do something to actually protect yourself. That's where the college student lies. I mean, frankly, the college student should be the one heading to Twitter, but they don't have the following. They don't have the leverage to make it a story where anybody would actually, I don't know, make a vlog about it. And if you want to see other vlogs like this, be sure to subscribe by hitting over there. And of course, watch another episode of Unbillable with me right down there.